Have you ever found yourself, really caught up in imagining future happiness? Maybe planning that perfect dream vacation, picturing every single detail.
Oh, absolutely. Or maybe focusing on landing that new job, convinced it's the key to lasting fulfillment.
Exactly. We all do it, don't we? We
Yeah.
conjure up these really vivid scenarios, things we just know will be pure bliss.
Mm-hmm.
But then, when reality actually happens sometimes,
Yeah.
well, it falls a little flat. Doesn't quite match the movie in our head.
Right. It happens more often than we probably admit.
Which raises a really fascinating question.
Mm.
Why? Why do our predictions about our own future happiness so often seem to miss the mark?
Yeah. Why are we so bad at knowing what will make us happy?
Today, we're taking a deep dive into exactly that puzzle. We're drawing insights from Daniel Gilbert's national bestseller, Stumbling on Happiness.
Ah, great book. Really thought-provoking stuff.
It really is. It's lauded by, thinkers and everyday readers alike. And it promises to sort of pull back the curtain on the illusions that trip us up when we try to forecast our own future joys.
Mm.
So our mission today is to explore how our own minds, specifically, our imagination, our memory, even how we perceive things, how they often work together to deceive us about how happy we'll actually be.
And crucially, what we can maybe do about it,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And what we can do about it. Get ready for some, hopefully some aha moments that might just shift how you think about happiness itself.
Yeah, and what's truly insightful about Gilbert's work, I think, is that he isn't really questioning if we can be happy. That's not the point.
Right.
Instead, he really zooms in on the process of predicting happiness and the cognitive biases that consistently get in our way.
So the mechanics of it almost.
Pretty much. And Daniel Gilbert, he's a Harvard psychologist, right? His specialty is this field called effective forecasting.
Effective forecasting.
Yeah, sounds fancy, but basically it's just our ability or inability maybe to predict our own emotional reactions to future events.
So how we think we'll feel about something later on.
Exactly. And this deep dive is all about helping you, our listener, gain that knowledge quickly but, thoroughly, uncovering those surprising, sometimes counterintuitive insights about why our joy predictions are often skewed.
And how that misunderstanding impacts, well, pretty much all the decisions we make.
Yeah.
Big and small.
Right. From what you choose for dinner to, major life changes.
Okay, so let's really dig into this idea of imagination first. As humans, we have this incredible ability, it's almost like a superpower, to envision the future.
Mm-hmm. It's fundamental to planning, to dreaming.
Right. It lets us strategize, set goals, chase after things. So much of our pursuit of happiness is built on these mental pictures of what's coming.
It really drives us.
But Gilbert argues, and this is key, while this ability is amazing, our imagination isn't always our best guide. It's actually kind of unreliable sometimes.
Yeah, he shows how it's riddled with these psychological pitfalls that lead us to miscalculate. We stumble, like the title says.
We stumble. Okay, so what's one of the big pitfalls then?
Well, one of the biggest ones he identifies is what he calls the over-idealization bias.
Over-idealization.
Okay.
Think about it. When you imagine something in the future, let's go back to that dream vacation.
Right. Sunshine, beaches.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Your mind fills in the details, but it does it based on your current feelings. And here's the thing. It cherry-picks the good stuff.
Ah, okay, so only the highlights reel.
Pretty much. You focus on the perfect sunsets, the relaxing vibes, maybe that amazing meal you're going to have. What you tend to ignore, or just conveniently forget, are the potential hassles. The crowds, the flight delays, maybe bad weather.
Some mosquito bites.
Right. The real stuff. Gilbert says our minds just instinctively prioritize those really pleasing, idealized images over the grittier, realistic details.
So we're basically setting ourselves up for a bit of a letdown.
Kind of, yeah. It creates these skewed expectations right from the start. And that leads to this subtle, maybe, but pervasive sense of disappointment when reality doesn't quite match that perfect mental movie.
We edit out the boring or annoying parts in advance.
We do. We create the trailer, not the full documentary.
That makes sense. And what's really fascinating here, related to that, is even when we're expecting good things, positive changes, our brain is kind of already preparing for things to go back to normal.
Back to baseline.
Exactly. Which brings us to hedonic adaptation.
Hedonic adaptation. I've heard of this. The hedonic treadmill idea.
Precisely. Gilbert explains that, major life events, getting that promotion, buying a house, getting married, even winning the lottery.
the big stuff we aim for.
Right. They definitely spike our happiness levels for a bit.
Yeah.
But those euphoric feelings, they tend to fade much faster than we anticipate.
Faster than we think they will.
Much faster. Research consistently shows we adapt to positive changes incredibly quickly. We just, get used to them.
All right.
We return to our individual baseline happiness level.
So it's not necessarily cynical, it's just how we're wired.
Exactly. It's actually kind of liberating, I think. It means that constant chase for the next big thing, the bigger house, the faster car.
The next promotion.
Yeah. It's, to a degree, a treadmill we can actually choose to step off. Because sustainable joy might not be in getting more, but maybe in appreciating the present, knowing that even amazing things become, ordinary.
So the new car smell of happiness, it really doesn't last.
It really doesn't, not in the way we imagine it will. We get used to the new normal incredibly fast, and then our brain starts looking for the next thing.
Okay, this is getting really interesting.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like it's not just about idealizing events, it's also about how we see ourselves in the future. Gilbert calls this specific trap presentism.
Presentism. Okay, what's that about?
It's this really strong tendency we have to project our current mood, our current feelings, even our current beliefs straight onto our future self.
Okay. So if I'm feeling down now, I assume future me will be down too?
Pretty much. You fail to account for the fact that, circumstances change, your emotions will change. If you're sad or stressed right now, you might picture your future self as still being sad or stressed, even if things are objectively likely to be totally different.
And the opposite too. If I'm happy now, I overestimate future happiness.
Exactly. If you're feeling great today, you might wildly overestimate how positive some future event will feel. This presentism just colors our predictions based on how we feel today, right now.
It's like wearing today's emotional glasses to look at tomorrow.
Perfectly put. And it goes even deeper into how we see ourselves over time.
Yeah.
Gilbert also talks about this disconnect from our future selves.
Disconnect? How so?
He points out that we often treat our future self like a different person almost, like a distant relative or someone we don't know that well.
Rather than just us, but later.
Right. We underestimate the continuity. We don't really grasp that future us is us, just, further down the line.
And what does that disconnect lead to?
Well, it can lead to really short-sighted decisions that actually undermine our future well-being. Think about procrastination.
Yeah. Putting things off.
We do it because the immediate comfort or pleasure of not doing the hard thing right now feels more important than the consequences for that other future person who has to deal with the mess later.
Because future me will handle it right.
Yeah.
They'll have more energy, more discipline.
Exactly. We act like future Avibus will be magically different, better equipped. Same with bad financial habits or delaying health stuff. We burden our future selves because we don't fully connect with them now.
That's a really subtle but powerful form of self-deception, isn't it? It also makes me wonder, do we ever appreciate the small stuff? The everyday things?
That's another key point Gilbert makes. He argues our imagination because it's so drawn to the big, shiny, extraordinary events.
The vacations, the lottery wins.
Right. It tends to completely sideline the mundane, the everyday routines, the small, repetitive moments that actually make up most of our lives.
But those mundane things might be where real contentment lies.
That's exactly his insight. Those small, seemingly insignificant moments like your morning coffee, finishing a small task, petting your dog, a regular family dinner.
The comfortable, predictable stuff?
Yeah. That stuff often influences our overall happiness much more substantially, more consistently than those rare, big, splashy events.
So happiness might be hiding in plain sight, in the everyday rhythm.
Kind of. It's like this steady hum of contentment that we often miss because we're constantly scanning the horizon for the next big peak. We miss the forest, the few really exciting trees.
That really resonates. And Gilbert also critiques this broader societal thing, doesn't he? This, obsession with being happy all the time.
He does. He points out that this cultural pressure to achieve constant, intense happiness sets a really unrealistic standard.
Because life isn't like that. It has ups and downs.
Exactly. Life inevitably includes challenges, setbacks, sadness, frustration, boredom. That's just part of being human. And when we're told we should be blissfully happy 24/7, experiencing those normal negative emotions feels like failure.
Leading to chronic dissatisfaction because we're not meeting this impossible ideal.
Right. So Gilbert suggests it's not about not wanting well-being, but that a more authentic, satisfying life comes from accepting the whole spectrum of emotions.
Embracing the difficult stuff, too. Seeing it as part of a rich life.
Yeah. Understanding that discomfort and struggle aren't signs you're doing life wrong, they're just part of the deal. It's about living the whole experience, not just the highlight reel.
That feels much more achievable, actually.
So, wrapping up this section on imagination,
Yeah.
what's the takeaway? It's this amazing human faculty, right? It lets us plan, dream, innovate.
Indispensable.
But it also gives us this powerful, yet often misleading illusion that we can control our emotional future. And that illusion, as Gilbert shows, is just full of traps.
Over-idealizing, presentism, ignoring the mundane.
Exactly. Our internal projector needs, maybe, a reality check. A healthy dose of skepticism about its own forecasts. Okay, so if our imagination is a bit unreliable, when looking forward, what about looking back? Our memories, we tend to trust those, right? They feel like our history.
Yeah, they feel solid, like a recording of what actually happened.
But Gilbert throws a curveball here too. He says our recollections are far from perfect recorders. In fact, our understanding of past happiness is often skewed, which messes up our predictions for the future too.
So memory isn't like a video camera just playing back the past.
Not at all. He describes memory as a reconstructive process. It's not just retrieval, it's active rebuilding, and it's subject to all sorts of distortions and biases.
Reconstructive, meaning we kind of piece it together each time.
Exactly. Our brain doesn't store perfect copies. When we try to remember something, it fills in gaps, maybe smooths things over, sometimes even changes details to make a better story or fit what we believe now.
So our current mood or beliefs can actually change how we remember the past.
Significantly, our present state influences the reconstruction of the past, which means our memory of how happy or unhappy we were back then can be pretty unreliable.
So we're using potentially flawed data from the past to predict the future.
Precisely. It's like editing a movie slightly differently every time you watch it, based on how you feel today. And this is especially true for episodic memory, right? Our memory for specific events in our lives.
Yeah, those personal experiences like a party, a first date, maybe a tough time we went through, they feel so real, so accurate.
But they're not always.
Gilbert argues they're highly susceptible to this reconstruction. Our brain alters details, maybe omits things, to create a narrative that feels coherent, often one that makes us look or feel better.
So the story gets tweaked.
Subtly, yeah. But the consequence is huge. If we can't accurately remember how happy an experience actually made us, how can we accurately predict how a similar future experience will make us feel?
We're basing predictions on a distorted past.
We are, unknowingly, using edited data. And what's really fascinating is how the brain does this rewriting. It's often not conscious, right? There are these mechanisms.
Yeah, what are some of those?
Well, one really common one is rosy retrospection.
Looking back with rose-tinted glasses.
Exactly. It's that tendency to remember past events as much more positive or fun than they actually were at the time.
Like old family vacations, you forget the arguments and just remember the highlights.
Precisely. The long car rides, the bad weather, the teenage angst that fades. What's left is the idyllic, sun-drenched memory.
And that makes us want to repeat it, thinking it will be just as good.
Right. It makes us yearn for those good old days and overestimate how happy similar future activities will make us. We chase a romanticized past.
Okay, so we make the past better than it was. But what about negative stuff?
Well, there's a flip side, too, often driven by survival instincts. The negativity bias.
Negativity bias, meaning bad stuff sticks out more.
Yeah, particularly unpleasant or threatening memories often get recalled with much greater vividness and intensity, sometimes even more intensely than the original experience.
Like replaying an embarrassing moment over and over.
Exactly, or a traumatic event. This can make us irrationally avoid future experiences that we think caused immense unhappiness, even if the actual discomfort was manageable or temporary.
So our memory biases us in both ways, too positive or too negative.
Making it a pretty unreliable guide overall. It's not a neutral record.
And it gets even more interesting because it's not just about positive or negative feelings, it's also about consistency.
Right.
Like we want our past selves to make sense with who we are now.
That's another powerful one, the consistency bias.
Okay, explain that one.
It's this subtle tendency to reconstruct our past attitudes and beliefs to align them more closely with our current ones.
So if I love my job now, I might misremember always loving it.
Exactly. You might genuinely believe and remember that you've always felt positively about it, even if, objectively, there were periods of significant doubt or dissatisfaction in the past. Like looking back through old diaries and being surprised at what you wrote. Precisely. This bias paints this falsely consistent picture of our happiness journey, making our past self seem more like our present self than they really were. And that affects future projections too.
We smooth out the bumps and contradictions in our own history.
We do. We create a simpler, more linear story.
Wow. Okay, one more memory flaw you mentioned. Hindsight.
Ah, yes, the hindsight bias. The classic I knew it all along effect.
Right, where after something happens, we feel like we saw it coming.
Exactly. We look back at past events, especially their outcomes, and believe they were way more predictable than they actually felt at the time.
So after a project succeeds, we forget how uncertain we felt beforehand.
Totally. We might remember feeling confident, overlooking all the doubts and anxieties we had. This misjudgment of past predictability makes us overconfident about the future.
Because we think we're better predictors than we are.
Precisely. It distorts our understanding of past decisions and makes us less likely to question our current forecasts about future happiness. We think we've got better foresight than we do. So if we pull all these memory flaws together, rosy retrospection, negativity bias, consistency bias, hindsight bias, what's the big picture?
The big picture is that our memories are fundamentally unreliable narrators of our own emotional past.
They're not objective records.
And this unreliability deeply affects how we anticipate future happiness. So the insight here, it's really about humility, isn't it?
I think so. It encourages us to question our own memories, to be more cautious about using past experiences as the sole blueprint for future decisions about happiness.
Right, because the blueprint itself might be distorted.
Exactly. The crux is, by acknowledging these distortions, by understanding that memory reconstructs rather than just replays, we can actually improve our ability to make more realistic predictions.
Build a better, more honest compass for our emotional lives, one that accounts for these mental quirks.
Precisely. A compass that knows its own magnetic deviations, so to speak.
Okay, so we've established our imagination misleads us about the future, and our memory distorts the past. We're not great predictors, and our data is flawed.
Doesn't paint a great picture for navigating life, does it?
It sounds tricky, but it makes you wonder, how do scientists even try to measure something like happiness?
Yeah.
It seems so subjective, so personal.
It's a huge challenge for sure. And Gilbert dives right into the science of subjective well-being.
Subjective well-being, is that the technical term for happiness?
Pretty much, and he defines it as this complex thing, not just one feeling. It includes our immediate emotional responses, the ups and downs day to day.
Momentary feelings.
Right. Then there's our satisfaction in specific areas of life work, relationships, health, finances.
Domain satisfaction. Okay.
And finally, our overall global judgment of life satisfaction, how we feel about our life as a whole, looking back.
So it's multi-layered. How do they measure all that?
Mostly through self-report surveys, asking people to rate their feelings and satisfaction levels. Also through experimental methods, like asking people to report their mood at random times during the day.
Trying to capture both the in-the-moment feeling and the overall evaluation.
Exactly. It's a tricky business, trying to quantify something so slippery and personal.
And this brings us back to effective forecasting, right?
Yeah.
Predicting how we'll feel. Gilbert says this is central to how we make decisions.
Absolutely central. So much of what we choose to do or not do is driven by this underlying belief that it will maximize our future happiness.
We chase the things we think will make us feel good.
Constantly. But, as Gilbert and tons of research show, there's this persistent gap. A discrepancy between the happiness we expect to get from something and the happiness we actually experience when it happens.
The prediction error we keep making.
Right. And he argues this gap is largely driven by these cognitive biases we're talking about. We make choices based on flawed forecasts.
Okay, so beyond the imagination and memory issues, what specific biases really mess up these forecasts when it comes to happiness?
Gilbert highlights two really key ones that are closely linked. First, there's the impact bias.
Impact bias, meaning we overestimate the impact of things.
Exactly. We overestimate both the intensity and the duration of our future emotional reactions.
So we think good things will make us happier for longer than they do, and bad things will make us sadder for longer.
Precisely. People think winning the lottery will bring endless joy, or that a breakup will cause devastation forever.
But the research shows.
The research shows that while these events definitely have a short-term impact, the long-term effect on happiness diminishes surprisingly quickly. We adapt.
Back to that hedonic adaptation idea.
Exactly. We return to our baseline much faster than we predict. We just don't stay as high or as low for as long as we think we will.
Okay, so impact bias is overestimating intensity and duration. What's the second one?
The second is focalism.
Focalism, like focusing too much.
Yeah, focusing too much on the event itself and neglecting all the other things that will still be going on in our lives at the same time.
Tunnel vision.
Pretty much. Someone predicts getting a promotion will bring pure, unending happiness,
Right.
but they forget about the increased stress, the longer hours, the annoying commute that doesn't change, their relationships, their health, all the other stuff that contributes to their overall well-being day to day.
So we focus on the shiny new thing and forget the rest of the picture.
Exactly. Focalism makes us zoom in on that one potential source of happiness, blinding us to the whole context. It's like judging a movie by one amazing scene.
That makes so much sense. And it's not just about predicting the future or remembering the past. Gilbert also talks about how we perceive the present differently depending on, well, on which self is doing the perceiving.
Yes, this is a fascinating distinction he makes. The experiencing self versus the remembering self.
Experiencing versus remembering. Okay, what's the difference?
The experiencing self is the one living life in real time. It's immersed in the moment-to-moment flow of sensations, emotions, thoughts. It's the raw, immediate feeling.
Okay, the self that's actually living it.
Right. The remembering self, on the other hand, is the one that looks back on those experiences later, and it looks back from a biased perspective.
Bias how?
It's influenced by all those cognitive biases. It doesn't remember every moment equally. It tends to focus on the peaks, the most intense moments, and the ending of the experience, not the average feeling over the whole duration.
Okay. So the remembering self creates a kind of highlights reel based on intensity and the ending.
Exactly. And this difference between what we experience moment to moment and what we remember experiencing is crucial for understanding why we misjudge our own happiness.
Wow. So these two selves can tell very different stories about the same event. How does that create illusions?
Well, two key biases really drive this difference. First, the peak end rule.
Peak end rule. Okay, relates to what you just said.
Precisely. We judge an entire past experience largely based on how we felt at its most intense point, the peak, and how we felt right at the end.
Not the average feeling throughout.
Not really. Think about a vacation. Maybe several days were just okay, but the last day was fantastic. The remembering self might latch onto that great ending and the peak moments and judge the whole trip as amazing.
Even if a lot of it was just fine.
Yeah.
Or even annoying.
Right. Or think of a painful medical procedure. If the most painful part was really bad, or if the ending was abrupt and uncomfortable, we might remember the whole thing as awful, even if parts were tolerable.
So the peak and the end have disproportionate weight in our memory.
Hugely disproportionate. And this skews our understanding of what actually brings us joy or suffering, both when we look back and when we plan ahead.
Okay, peak end rule. What's the other bias related to this experiencing remembering self difference?
It's closely related, duration neglect.
Duration neglect, meaning we ignore how long something lasted.
Pretty much, yeah. The actual length of a pleasant or unpleasant experience influences our memory of its intensity much less than you'd logically expect.
So a short unpleasant thing might be remembered almost as badly as a long unpleasant thing.
Often, yes. Or the memory doesn't scale proportionately. If one unpleasant task took 10 minutes and another took 30, you might not remember the second one as 3 times worse. Your memory focuses more on the peak unpleasantness and the feeling at the end.
Not the total amount of time spent feeling bad.
Right. This leads to misjudgments about past experiences, which then, of course, messes up our predictions for the future. We don't accurately weigh the time spent in different emotional states.
So between the experiencing self living it and the remembering self selectively recalling peaks and ends while ignoring duration, we're basically rewriting our own history constantly,
That's a great way to put it. Gilbert talks about retrospective rewriting.
rewriting the past after the fact.
Yeah. Our minds actively alter memories to fit our current self-image or current beliefs. We turn experiences that were probably mixed, maybe neutral, into simpler stories of either happy or unhappy.
So if I'm feeling good about a decision now, I might rewrite the memory of making it to feel less conflicted than I actually was.
Exactly. Or if a relationship ended badly, you might retrospectively view the entire thing through a negative lens, forgetting the genuinely good times. We create this narrative, almost a fantasy, that aligns with who we are now.
Which further separates the experiencing self's reality from the remembering self story.
Precisely. It's a constant, subtle editing process.
And even our perception of the present isn't safe from distortion. You mentioned the affect heuristic.
Right, the affect heuristic. This is a mental shortcut where our current mood, our immediate feelings, strongly influences how we perceive ongoing events and make judgments about them right now.
So if I'm in a bad mood, the world looks worse.
Pretty much. And crucially, we often misattribute the source of that mood. You might feel grumpy because you slept badly, but then you walk into work and blame your bad mood on your job or your colleagues.
Instead of realizing it's just general grumpiness from something else.
Exactly. Or if you just got good news, a neutral interaction might seem overly positive. Our current feelings act like a filter, coloring our immediate perception and judgment, often inaccurately. Okay, wow. So if we pull all this together, impact bias, focalism, experiencing versus remembering self, peak end, duration neglect, retrospective rewriting, affect heuristic, it's a lot.
It is a lot. It shows just how many layers of potential distortion exist between reality and our perception of it, past, present, and future.
But Gilbert's point isn't really to make us feel like our minds are hopelessly flawed. It's more about
Awareness, right.
exactly. It's about encouraging us to embrace the uncertainty, the complexity of how we perceive happiness, and crucially, to set more realistic expectations. By understanding these biases, understanding the difference between living it and remembering it, we can maybe navigate our emotions more wisely.
That seems to be the goal, to build a more discerning relationship with our own minds, allowing us to pursue genuine well-being with maybe a bit more clarity and less self-deception.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked a lot about the internal stuff, our imagination, memory, perception biases. But there's another huge factor, isn't there? Other people.
Oh, absolutely. Our social world profoundly shapes our happiness in ways we often don't even realize.
It's not just what's going on inside our own heads. Gilbert really emphasizes how our social environment influences our expectations, our desires, and ultimately our satisfaction.
He starts with social norms, right? The unwritten rules of our culture or group.
Yeah, explain those a bit. How do they tie into happiness?
Well, these norms, the unspoken expectations about how to behave, what's considered valuable, what success looks like, they provide the framework through which we judge ourselves and others.
So they define what's good or desirable.
Exactly. And that directly impacts what we think will make us happy. If society heavily values, say, material wealth or a certain career path,
Like being a doctor or a lawyer.
right, then many people might internalize that belief that achieving that specific thing is the key to happiness, even if their own personal experience or deeper values might point elsewhere.
We end up chasing goals set by others, potentially.
Often without even realizing it, we absorb these values from our environment.
And a big part of that environment is comparing ourselves to others, isn't it? That seems like a major driver.
Huge. Gilbert talks a lot about social comparisons. We are fundamentally comparative creatures. We can't seem to help measuring ourselves against the people around us.
And this comparison game can mess with our heads.
Definitely. He breaks it down into two main types, upward and downward comparisons.
Upward means comparing people who seem better off.
Yeah, people who appear wealthier, more successful, maybe happier, have a seemingly perfect family life, especially curated on social media.
Right. The Instagram effect.
Exactly. And constantly making those upward comparisons often leads to feelings of inadequacy, envy, dissatisfaction. It can really diminish our own happiness, even if our life is objectively pretty good.
And downward comparison is the opposite.
Yeah.
Looking at people seemingly worse off.
Right. And while that can sometimes give a temporary boost to self-esteem, at least I'm not dealing with that, it's usually a pretty fragile basis for happiness.
Because it depends on someone else's misfortune.
Pretty much. It doesn't typically lead to genuine, sustainable contentment. It's more about feeling slightly better by comparison.
This leads right into the idea of relative well-being, doesn't it? That it's not just our absolute situation, but our situation compared to others that matters most for happiness.
Gilbert strongly argues this is a major factor. Our perceived status relative to our peer group, our neighbors, our social circle, that can often be a more powerful determinant of our happiness than our actual absolute circumstances.
So you could be objectively well off, but if everyone around you is super well off, you might feel dissatisfied.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It helps explain why you see significant levels of dissatisfaction or anxiety even in very affluent societies. People have a lot, materially speaking, but they're constantly exposed to others who seem to have even more or achieve more or look happier.
Leading to that feeling of never having quite enough, or not being enough.
That pervasive sense of falling short, yeah, it's driven by that relative comparison.
This also makes me think about how well we understand other people's happiness. If we're comparing so much, are we even comparing accurately?
That's a great question, and it leads to another concept Gilbert discusses: empathy gaps.
Empathy gaps, meaning we're bad at guessing how others feel.
Often, yes, we struggle to accurately predict or understand the emotions of others simply because we're not in their specific situation or their emotional state right now. Our own feelings and circumstances act as a filter.
So we make assumptions based on outward appearances.
Right. We might see someone with a high-paying job and assume they must be thrilled, but we don't see the internal stress or lack of fulfillment they might be experiencing. We project our idea of happiness onto them.
Our external observations are poor proxies for internal states.
Very often. And crucially, Gilbert points out these empathy gaps also apply to our own future selves.
How so? We struggle to empathize with ourselves later.
Exactly. We fail to really consider how much our own emotions, circumstances, priorities, even our values might change over time. The you making the decision today isn't the same you who will experience the outcome.
So the exciting project I plan now might not feel so great to future me who has to actually do the work.
Precisely. Or a challenge that looks terrifying now might actually bring unexpected satisfaction or growth to future you once you're tackling it. Our current self struggles to truly empathize with the different perspective and feelings of our future self.
We're projecting, again, just like with presentism, but onto our own future identity.
In a way, yes. It's another layer of predictive error stemming from our inability to truly step outside our current perspective.
So putting this social dimension together, norms, comparisons, relative standing, empathy gaps, it's clear our happiness isn't just an individual, internal thing.
Not at all. Our social environment acts like this invisible architect, constantly shaping our desires, our perceptions of success, and ultimately our satisfaction.
And understanding these influences is key.
Gilbert argues it's crucial. Becoming aware of these external pressures, the norms we've absorbed, the comparisons we make, allows us to navigate them more consciously.
To cultivate a happiness that's maybe more authentic, less driven by just keeping up or meeting external expectations.
Exactly. To find a well-being rooted more in our own genuine experience, rather than just reflecting what others value or how we stack up against them, it's about awareness of those nudges.
Speaking of these surprising influences, Gilbert touches on something really counterintuitive, something that goes against almost everything modern society tells us, the paradox of choice.
Ah, yes, the idea that more isn't always better when it comes to options.
Exactly. Conventional wisdom screams more choices, more freedom, more happiness, right? The ability to choose exactly what suits you perfectly must be good.
That's the standard thinking.
But Gilbert and others like Barry Schwartz argue it can be the opposite, that an abundance of options can paradoxically lead to less satisfaction.
Right, the paradox of choice. How does that work? Why would more choice make us less happy?
Well, the core idea is that when we're faced with too many possibilities, we can become overwhelmed. It leads to decision fatigue.
Like our brains just get tired from evaluating everything.
Pretty much. The mental effort of weighing all the pros and cons, comparing countless options, worrying about missing the best one, it becomes exhausting.
I can relate to that feeling, staring at a giant menu or endless streaming options.
Exactly. And the really frustrating outcome of this choice overload is that even after we make a decision, we're more likely to second-guess it.
Because there were so many other options we didn't choose.
Right. We keep wondering, did I pick the right one? Maybe that other one would have been better. This constant doubt undermines our satisfaction with the choice we actually made, even if it was perfectly fine.
So the freedom of choice backfires into regret or dissatisfaction.
We can, yeah. It's this exhausting cycle of seeking the best and then worrying we missed it.
And this ties really nicely into another key concept from Gilbert: miswanting.
Miswanting. That sounds descriptive. What does it mean?
It's his brilliant term for our tendency to desire things we believe will make us deeply happy, things we invest a lot in pursuing,
Okay.
but which ultimately fall short of our expectations once we actually get them.
Wanting the wrong things, basically. Or wanting things for the wrong reasons.
Kind of. Our anticipation, as we've seen, gets shaped by social pressures, by marketing, and crucially, by our own flawed predictions about how we'll feel our effective forecasts.
So we build up this huge expectation.
Exactly. And then the reality doesn't match the fantasy. The dream job has downsides. The luxury car payment is stressful. The perfect relationship requires work. The outcome isn't the lasting bliss we predicted.
leading to disappointment instead of happiness. That feeling of, is that all there is?
Precisely that feeling. We wanted it so badly, worked so hard, and the payoff isn't what we imagined.
Can you give some concrete examples?
Okay.
Because I feel like everyone experiences miswanting sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. The research is full of them. Think about lottery winners.
Right, the ultimate fantasy for many. Surely that brings lasting happiness.
You'd think so. But studies consistently find that while there's definitely an initial spike in euphoria, after a few months, maybe a year, their reported happiness levels often return pretty close to where they were before they won.
They adapt. The hedonic treadmill again.
Exactly. They get used to the money, new problems arise, social pressures change. The massive win doesn't permanently reset their happiness thermostat.
Wow. What about other things people chase? Like luxury goods or career goals?
Same pattern often applies. People believe acquiring the fancy car, the huge house, the latest gadget, or reaching the pinnacle of their career, like becoming CEO, will bring this deep, enduring fulfillment.
The things society tells us equal success and happiness.
Right. And while these things might provide a temporary thrill, the feeling often fades quickly. They adapt, and soon they might find themselves wanting the next thing, because that lasting satisfaction they forecasted just didn't materialize in the way they expected.
The goalpost keeps moving because the feeling doesn't stick around.
Exactly. The achievement becomes the new normal, and the anticipated joy dissipates. And if we connect this miswanting back to the bigger picture, it's a perfect illustration of the impact bias, isn't it?
Ah, right. Overestimating the intensity and duration of future feelings.
Precisely. Miswanting is often fueled by that impact bias. We think the new job or the big win will change everything, bringing a permanently elevated state of happiness.
But our rapid adaptation, that hedonic adaptation, means it just doesn't work that way.
Right. Our ability to get used to new circumstances, good or bad, explains why these achievements don't deliver the lasting fulfillment we predict. The desire itself is often built on a misprediction.
Leaving us perpetually chasing a future happiness that's based on faulty forecasts.
It can feel like that sometimes, yeah. Always pursuing the next horizon.
Okay, this deep dive has shown us so many ways our minds can trip us up when we think about happiness. Flawed imagination, biased memory, perceptual tricks, social pressures, the paradox of choice. It sounds almost discouraging.
It could seem that way, like we're doomed to just stumble around miscalculating our joy.
Right. But Gilbert doesn't just leave us there, does he? He actually offers practical ways to get better at this. Strategies to improve our predictions.
Absolutely. He's not just diagnosing the problem, he's offering potential solutions. He argues that even with all these biases, we can take steps to make our expectations more accurate.
Bridging that gap between what we predict and what we actually feel.
Exactly. The strategies involve both cognitive shifts, changing how we think, and behavioral adjustments, changing what we do.
Okay, so what are some of these strategies? How can we get better at predicting our own happiness?
Well, one of the most powerful and maybe counterintuitive strategies he suggests is remarkably simple. Learning from others, or what he sometimes calls surrogation.
Surrogation. Using other people as surrogates for ourselves.
Pretty much. We often fall into the trap of thinking our own experience is totally unique, that general patterns don't apply to us.
I'm different.
Right. And that belief makes us ignore incredibly valuable information. How other people actually feel in situations similar to the ones we're considering.
So instead of relying solely on my own flawed imagination,
Look at the real-world experiences of others. If you're thinking about a big life change, changing careers, moving cities, having kids, making a huge purchase, don't just imagine how you'll feel.
talk to people who've actually done it.
Exactly. And don't just ask for the highlights. Ask about the real feelings, the challenges, the unexpected difficulties, the genuine joys. Pay attention to their lived experience.
Using their reality to ground your prediction.
Precisely. It's like crowdsourcing your emotional forecast. You leverage collective wisdom instead of just your own biased internal simulation. It's often a much better predictor.
That makes a lot of sense. So what about tackling those cognitive biases directly? Impact bias, focalism, presentism, can we actually counteract them?
Gilbert argues we can, or at least significantly reduce their power. And the first step is simply awareness of cognitive biases.
Just knowing they exist helps.
Tremendously. If you understand, for example, the impact bias, that you tend to overestimate how strongly and for how long future events will affect you, you can consciously dial back your predictions.
So recognize you'll probably adapt faster than you think.
Exactly. Remind yourself that both the highs and lows likely won't last as long or be as intense as your imagination suggests. This conscious awareness allows you to challenge your automatic forecasts.
Become a more skeptical editor of your own mental movies.
Perfectly put.
And this awareness probably leads naturally to setting realistic expectations, right?
Absolutely. If you know your predictions tend to be biased, you can deliberately aim for a more balanced view, instead of expecting pure bliss or total disaster.
Step to mix. Some good, some bad, some just normal.
Exactly. Anticipate a blend of positive and negative outcomes in almost any situation. Life is rarely all one thing. When your expectations are more grounded in this messy reality,
You're less likely to be disappointed.
right, your lived experience is more likely to meet or maybe even exceed those realistic expectations, leading to more consistent satisfaction. You're building on solid ground, not on fantasy.
Okay, those are great cognitive shifts. What about actual things we can do? Behavioral adjustments.
Gilbert suggests a couple of powerful ones. One is cultivating mindfulness and deliberate reflection.
Paying more attention to the present moment. How does that help predict the future?
By giving you better data. If you pay closer attention to your current experiences, what genuinely makes you feel good, interested, engaged, or drained right now, you develop a much more accurate understanding of your own personal sources of happiness and unhappiness.
So you learn from your experiencing self in real time.
Exactly. You're not just relying on those potentially distorted memories or imaginative leaps. You're gathering real-time internal data, which informs better predictions about what future situations might actually feel like for you.
Learning what truly makes you tick, moment by moment.
Right. Another behavioral strategy is what he calls regular exposure.
Regular exposure, like trying things out in small doses.
Precisely. Instead of just imagining what a big change will be like, find ways to incrementally experience parts of it beforehand.
Like testing the waters.
Exactly. If you're thinking of a massive career change, don't just quit your job and jump. Maybe take on some freelance projects in the new field, volunteer, shadow someone, take a relevant class.
Get a real taste of it first.
Yes. This gives you concrete, first-hand experience data from your experiencing self again, which provides a much more solid basis for predicting long-term satisfaction than pure speculation does. You reduce the guesswork.
So, understanding our flaws, using others' experiences, setting realistic goals, being mindful, testing things out. It sounds like the key isn't perfect prediction, but maybe adaptability.
That seems to be a huge part of Gilbert's ultimate message. Understanding our imperfections doesn't make us failures at happiness. It actually makes us more adaptable.
How so?
By embracing flexibility and resilience. If you accept that your predictions are inherently imperfect, that your imagination can mislead and your memory can rewrite.
You stop clinging so tightly to one specific imagined future.
Exactly. You become more open to change, more ready to adjust your plans based on how things actually unfold, based on new information and real experiences.
Letting go of the need for perfect foresight and control.
Precisely. It allows you to navigate the inevitable uncertainties of life more gracefully. Joy can then emerge from the actual journey, from adapting to reality, rather than just from rigidly sticking to a potentially flawed initial plan. It's about finding contentment within the unfolding process. #tag outro.
So, wrapping this all up, wow, our deep dive into Daniel Gilbert's Stumbling on Happiness really reveals this compelling, maybe slightly uncomfortable truth. We're often stumbling, not soaring, when we try to map out our future joy.
Yeah, it's a humbling look at how our minds work, isn't it?
Definitely. We've seen the flaws in our imagination, how it over-idealizes, gets stuck in the present.
How it overlooks the everyday stuff.
Right. And the deceptive nature of our memory, constantly rewriting the past.
Plus those perceptual distortions, the experiencing self versus the remembering self, the peak end rule.
And the subtle but powerful grip of social influence norms, comparisons.
And that surprising paradox of choice, where more options can actually make us less happy. It's a lot of ways to stumble.
It really is.
Yeah.
But, as you said, Gilbert doesn't just leave us lost in the woods. He offers a path forward.
He really does. He gives us those practical strategies. Learning from others, surrogation, that's huge.
Yeah, acknowledging our biases, just being aware of them.
Setting those realistic expectations, practicing mindfulness, getting that regular exposure.
Testing things out.
Right. The core message feels like Well, the pursuit of happiness is just inherently complex and uncertain. It's not a simple equation to solve.
Yeah. And maybe striving for perfect prediction or that constant state of euphoria Gilbert critiques. Maybe that's not the point. Maybe it's even counterproductive.
I think that's exactly it. He seems to nudge us towards something deeper, more achievable, perhaps. Cultivating resilience, adaptability, finding contentment within life's unpredictability.
Learning to navigate the stumbles, maybe even finding some grace in them.
Yeah, finding joy in the actual unfolding, not just chasing a forecast. Which brings us to a final thought, maybe a question for you, the listener, to take away from this deep dive. If you truly accepted this inherent unpredictability of happiness, if you really let go of the idea that perfect foresight is possible or even desirable, how might that actually change the choices you make today?
That's a big question.
And maybe what's one small, concrete step you could take, starting now, to better appreciate the complex, maybe messy reality of your current happiness, the good, the bad, the okay, rather than constantly focusing on chasing that potentially illusory future joy you forecast?
Oh, that is definitely a provocative thought to mull over. How accepting unpredictability might change our present actions.
Yeah.
We really hope this deep dive into Daniel Todd Gilbert's fascinating book, Stumbling on Happiness, has given you some surprising insights, maybe some useful tools, and kept you well informed on your own unique journey to understanding joy. Until next time.